Cybernation Uncensored.
And welcome to another episode of Tales from the Forlorn Dopes. I am Cybersmily with my co-host.
I am Wisdom. Greetings, programs. It is good to see you for yet another installment.
Yeah, so I guess we can get some news out of the way. So I did a release over the weekend. I created a quick app for the digital dating in the dark future, PDF
nice.
DLC, so you can go over there and start generating dates. Kicking around an idea of expanding that table, which I really should, because it definitely should have some type of bad dating experience in which you gain enemies or lose cash or do something else that gets you in trouble. Maybe get hunted by a corporation.
Just embarrass yourself. That should be there.
Yep. So that went over the weekend. Also, I did a bunch of bug fixes and a few changes to the character generator and combat tracker for Cyberpunk 2020.
Just had the idea of a Cyberpunk one-shot based on the movie the Bruce Willis, Kim Basinger movie Blind Date, John Larroquette.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, I think it would work.
Yeah, the other thing that, and I don't know if it dropped this week or if it was been there for a while, but HBO Max now has the Blade Runner's Black Lotus. I just saw,
it does?
Yeah, I just saw the first 3 episodes. So far, I'm liking it. It's kind of like the not as cartoony-ish as the new Ghost in the Shell, but similar type of style to that.
The animation of the new Ghost in the Shell never bothered me. What bothered me was the ridiculous Mary Sue character. Like, that is, she's just the most obnoxious and unnecessary character addition to any series I've ever seen in my life. She's like that Oliver kid from the Brady Bunch. Just like, wow.
For those who don't know, the Oliver kid from the Brady Bunch, we're dating ourselves.
Yeah, horribly. Oh my God. Yeah. But I mean, that's the whole premise of the show, is we're two old farts who bitch about games.
But you didn't think that Tachikoma were kind of annoying?
I love the Tachikoma. They had flaws. They weren't they were childlike in their outlook on the world because they were basically brand new AIs. But like they never really hurt the story. This chick, every time she opens her mouth, it just hurts the story. Like, she is some weeboo nonsense that just doesn't belong in Ghost in the Shell, like, at all. Plus, like I said, she doesn't have any. She's a Mary Sue. She was brought on because she was apparently a hacker, which I don't know why the team needs a hacker when they've got Kusanagi on board, or Ishikawa. The dedicated hacker Ishikawa.
Yeah.
So apparently she's a super hacker, and then the last couple of episodes of 2045, we find out that she can also fight well enough to keep up with Kusanagi and Batou.
Yeah.
Like, how the hell does that work? Like, why does this? Oh, I hate her. She is what ruins the show for me. I liked the premise of the show. I liked the plot. I liked the storyline. I very much enjoyed hearing the voice actors come back. I like seeing the characters again. I didn't mind the CGI, mostly because we haven't had, like, that's just the way everything's going. Especially everything Shiro for some reason. I don't know why the only animated apple, with like 6 apple seeds out there, only one of them is traditional animation. The rest are all CGI.
Yep.
I don't know why, but that's the way that works. I still love those. Like, Appleseed is still my favorite manga of all time. And always, I can't imagine anything ever topping it. Just like Bubblegum Crisis is my favorite anime franchise of all time. So, with Appleseed coming in a fairly close second.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully I'll definitely have seen them all by the next episode and give us a little more feedback.
Yeah. No, I'll
review.
Probably start watching those as soon as this episode ends. I've been very much looking forward to watching those. It's not quite Cyberpunk news, but the GTA update for PS5 just dropped. Following in the footsteps of games like, Cyberpunk and Borderlands, Far Cry. They unleashed upon the world the PlayStation 5 version. Now, there's some problems with that. Mainly, if you upgrade to the PS5 version, it deletes all previous... Like, you can never go back and play it on PS4 again. It deletes those saves from the cloud. Which is kind of the suck. I get why they do it. Kind of. It doesn't really make... I don't agree with the reasons they do it. I would think there would be some kind of better limiter that they could put on there to keep you from going back and forth. But it also means you can't, while waiting for your friends to buy a PS5, you can't go back and play with them without starting over from scratch, which I don't know many people who want to do that. But the graphics update, yeah, it runs at 4K, 60 frames per second, and it looks and feels amazing.
Nice.
The new stuff they added, like the graphic update, is really the main draw right now. There's like 5 cars that they added. None of them are all that special. I do like the new paint feature. They should have added more variety to it. I think there's... I don't remember how many paints there are off the top of my head, but it's pretty. But that's really about all they added. The new cars and like 4 of the old ones get performance upgrades, but that's about it. So there's no reason to rush out and do it. Right now it's free though. If you have a copy of PlayStation or of GTA on PlayStation 4, you can upgrade for free if you've got a PS5. So if you've got it, do it. If not, there's no rush. There's certainly not enough new content there at all to make it worthwhile. It's more of just playing on next gen type thing. It is really pretty though, so it changes the feeling of the game. Apparently there's some other new Cyberpunk game coming out called Ascend. That's going to be like a top-down isometric type thing, but for all that, it looks pretty good. Those aren't typically my games. Like I don't do a lot of playing. I tried to play Ghost Runner, but if you're playing with a group of people, like if you want to get that old school Gauntlet vibe in the Cyberpunk world, yeah, it'll work for you. Check it out. The graphics look fucking amazing for a isometric top-down game like that.
Yeah, check it out. The other thing that's coming out is this thing called DMZ, which I haven't been a big comic book fan for a while, but I guess it's a DC property.
It was a Vertigo property, which is if the listeners don't know, Vertigo was like the adult line of DC Comics. It's where comics like Sandman and The Preacher came from. I fucking loved the DMZ comic. The whole premise is that there's been a civil war in the United States, and like one of the last battlegrounds is New York, Manhattan, the five boroughs. I cannot overstate how much I loved the original comic. That being said, this new version stars Rosario Dawson and doesn't, other than the general like location and setting, I'm not seeing any real similarity between the comic and the new show. Now the setting is amazing, and I'm assuming that there'll be some background characters. But like in the comic, the main protagonist was a dude who was a journalist. I don't know what's going on with the TV show. I know I will be watching it and giving it a shot because, like I said, I very much loved the comic. That being said, I also loved Why the Last Man, the comic, and Why the Last Man, the TV show, is just fucking awful. Like, I wanted to like it so very much, but I got like 4 episodes in, and finally I just gave up because I hated every single character on the show.
Yeah.
Like, there's nobody who's sympathetic.
Yeah, and that can happen with, any adaptation, whether it's going from one media to the other, that there is going to be some changes that need to be done to fit into that media, and also there's always that crunch of, well, we need to squeeze, something that really should take longer, whether it's a bigger page count or a longer movie, and try to cram it into a smaller set. So they're taking 5 pounds of shit and putting in a 3-pound bag.
I mean, I get it, and I like things not being direct word for word adaptations. I mean, sometimes that's fun. Like, sometimes it works out well. But I like it when they take a new spin on it. I liked. We've spoken before about how much I love the live action Cowboy Bebop. And sometimes it works. Like, it worked for me with Cowboy Bebop. With Preacher, it didn't work as well for me. Yeah. I thought everybody played their parts well, but I thought that they rushed through too many of the plots and focused on some of the plots that I just didn't give a fuck about. And the plots that I did, I don't know. They either rushed through them or they drug them out too long and I stopped caring. And I was a big fan of the show up until they got to New Orleans, and they just kind of lost me. But I loved the woman who played Tulip. I thought the guy who played Cassidy was freaking perfect. I realized that Preacher is not a cyberpunk show, but it was good. It wasn't the comic. But on the other hand, you've got a show like Good Omens, the Neil Gaiman property, Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, and it was fantastic.
Yep.
They're doing a sequel. I don't know how that works. There was no sequel to the books, but there might have been. I don't know. It's been a while. So yeah, with DMZ, I am very much looking forward to it.
Yeah,
we'll see.
For me, I hope to get some inspiration because the campaign I'm running right now is 2022, right? So it's been in game. It's been about 6 months of gameplay, and they're starting to get into the beginning of the Shadow War, and the Shadow or the Hot War came soon after. So I'm looking for like some inspiration, details, and things I can throw into the game because, it's the war between Militech and Arasaka is going to be heating up soon. and especially for like Night City or Humongous City, I'd like to see
Nice.
what DMZ does, especially if it's being fought in Manhattan. Perfect kind of cut over to translate into, say, Night City.
Yeah, I mean, with the original DMZ comic, it was all about a journalist covering the last battleground, Republicans versus Democrat Civil War bullshit. But yeah, I mean that premise is every bit as relevant today as it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if not more so, sadly.
Oh, this was written back in the reign of Bush, as it were.
Yeah, yeah. It's weird that. Yeah, I guess it's not weird. It's only 2 comics, but 2 of my favorite Vertigo cyberpunk related comics were both about journalists. It and of course Transmetropolitan, which is my favorite book of all time. It felt like they're not the two products aren't in any way related. They don't have anything to do with each other. But it felt like DMZ felt like a spiritual successor to Transmet. Yeah, so there's that.
Yep. All right, so kind of.
We should.
What's that? What should we do?
There are enough cyberpunk comics being released every week that we should start thinking about talking about those more often, or at least on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
Hell, the actual Cyberpunk 2077 comic. There's still one of those miniseries going on.
Yeah, I still need to pick them up. I know there was a couple comics that were provided with the game as DLCs, at least through GOG. That I kind of started reading, and I thought they were pretty well written. The art was definitely nice. I enjoyed it. It's a little abstract, but I don't mind that.
Yeah, I mean sometimes that works. Hell, my favorite artist of all time is Bill Sienkiewicz, and his stuff gets pretty abstract and surreal.
So, yeah, we can probably do that.
According to Capricious, he can barely hear you, pal.
Barely
This
hear
time
me.
it's not me.
Right.
I can hear you just fine, but Capricious is apparently having problems. Are you having problems hearing me too, Cap?
I can hear. Yeah, I can hear very good either. All right, let's see if this works a little better.
Also, Chernobyl. There are a ton of cyberpunk webcomics out there. You can. Last of the Atlases is pretty good. I don't have a list of links for them in front of me, I'm afraid. Which is weird because I used to.
Yeah, it might be sounding far away because I didn't have the mic directly against me. I was kind of lounging. Bad posture in my chair, as it were. Is this a little better? If not, I can boost it a little
All
more.
right. Apparently, I'm loud and clear. I don't know.
Yeah.
I said you sounded far away. I'm not hearing it, which is weird because usually I'm the one who's all like, I can barely hear you, but no.
Yeah, it all depends on the software. I think for Discord, it's probably tweaked versus the OBS utility that I'm using to broadcast. So that, and I've put in a better posture and getting close up to the mic. So hopefully this, as Capricious says, it's 100% better. Or 10,000% better. So I'll make sure to enunciate and talk directly into the mic going forward. Yeah. So, anything else before we get into tonight's topic that you want to
Uh,
talk about?
I think on the news, yeah, without bringing people down, that's about as much news as I want to discuss right now that I can think of.
Yeah.
There's
All right.
there's probably more that'll pop into my head as we go, but that's just the nature of the show.
Yeah. We'll ramble and talk and diverge from the subject at hand. So,
And
tonight we are going to be doing a kind of review, deep dive into the Neotribes sourcebook, something that is near and dear to wisdom.
it is. It is one of my absolute favorite of the Cyberpunk 2020 products.
So it was written by Ross Wynn and Eric Oppen. That's how you pronounce it?
Uh, yeah, I mean, your guess is as good as mine with that. I don't know how else you would pronounce it, Eric Oppen, but yeah, Ross is a friend of mine. He's actually he's the first of the Artal Saurian professionals that I made friends with, and I've always kind of looked at him uh, as like a big brother, kind of. Like he took me under his wing. We bounced ideas back and forth off each other for a while until basically health issues kind of kicked us both in the teeth. Um, I don't know how much. He doesn't seem to be as into gaming these days. He's pretty happy with his life though. I don't know why I'm going on about that. Let me get back to. He wrote this book, and he was one of the many authors
Listen up, you
on the
primitive
last book we
screw.
reviewed.
Yeah.
Listen up, you primitive screwheads. He also has the distinction of being the Solo of Fortune cover model.
Oh,
So,
that's him?
if you wanna, yes, Ross Spike Wynn. Um, yeah, I love this book so very very much.
Yep. Yeah, so let's start getting into it. So, chapter one is Nomads in America, in which it kind of starts getting into the nomad culture and a lot of the fluff and background. Um, there's also a timeline that takes you all the way to 2020 on how the nomad cultures developed, as well as the various types of nomad families you might encounter.
Yeah, that's it. This book was so influential to me. I mean, I've tried to cover a lot of material on Data Fortress. I've tried to uh, spread things out and introduce a bunch of stuff, but I have gone back to the well on making personal expansions to this book twice now. The first time was pretty minor with Nomad Market. It just allowed me to introduce this new element into my Cyberpunk games, where then nomads have a place to gather outside certain major cities and stuff like that, basically shipping hubs. And the first one was about the Night City Nomad Market, but then I expanded that a few years later with Dust in the Wind. I love nomads. I love running nomad campaigns, and this book is where that love originally blossomed. Like before this book, nomads were just kind of this like, okay, well, we got this nomad, we got this Mad Max element in the game. Uh, they travel the Badlands of America, and that was really all the information they gave us about nomads. This this book opened all that up, um, and this culture of nomads that the first chapter talks about, it the amount of inspiration it gave me cannot be understated. Cyberpunk no longer had to be limited to city streets. It took a broader look at the cyberpunk world itself, and basically every chapter of this, I'm just going to go on a rant. So
Go right ahead, my friend.
Yeah. Oh, and to clarify, Ross was the cover for Solo of Fortune 2. He was the cover model on that. Not the, I forget the guy's name for the cover of Solo of Fortune 1. But yeah.
We could mark it up as one of the questions if we ever get Mike onto this podcast, which I am going to try to attempt to do at some point.
Yeah, no, eventually I plan on getting Ross on the show, or at least trying. Oh, hey, Cap, yeah, I got you addicted to Nomads, huh? I take full responsibility for that. It's all me. And yeah, love running Nomads. That's the game I'm running you on right now, Will, is the Cyberpunk Nomad game.
That you are. But yeah, I like how they broke down the various types of like Agripax versus Native Americans versus Gypsies versus the Carnies and the Bikers as stereotypical kind of nomads. And then talking about the actual structure of like what a family is and actually bringing numbers to that, which
Yes.
I think so as a referee, you can then take, okay, what does it mean to have a family 10, right? So if I'm a family 10, I'm going to be in charge of so many people and have so many resources. And you can provide a little more structure and background to your nomad family of, oh yeah, my family is large and, you know, we're 95 members strong.
Yeah.
And knowing you have that type of
And
resource to pull on.
we're part of this larger clan who is then, again, part of a tribe who is part of a nation. I love the way they broke it down. I had never even thought about it in those terms before this book. It really, like, before this book came out, everybody was all like, okay, nomads, they're just like Mad Max bikers and shit. They're biker gangs. That's all they are. But this book came out and it expands on that. Like, nomad culture has always been a thing. Like you said, the gypsies, the agricorps, like migrant workers in America have always been a part of American culture. And that's on the large scale. On the smaller scale, you've got like the dudes who follow the dead or fish around. Like, those are nomads. Like, if you follow a band on tour, that is a very nomadic lifestyle. And if you've ever been to a dead lot, holy fucking shit, is that a nomad lifestyle? I guess it's a fish lot now. I'm not a fan of fish, so. Although their live music is very much different from their recorded, like, studio stuff.
Oh, I think yeah, and that could be part of a family, right? Yeah, you have a rocker.
Oh, absolutely.
Rocker girl who's leading the charge, and
and in fact, the one time I tried to run a rocker campaign, it crossed over. Basically, they were like a punk rock version of the Grateful Dead, and they get crossed over into nomad territory quite a bit.
yeah, I mean, so it's definitely worth a read for the chapter one. Even the interview between the nomad and the media, you can glean a lot out of it, and kind of gives you that flavor. And I think a lot of the source books have kind of those sections of a person in the situation that the book's about, giving feedback of their life around it, which I always liked and kind of brought me a little closer in game and how I'd like to run my games.
Yeah. I mean, this first chapter is pretty much all nothing but flavor text. Hell, most of the book is really just flavor text.
Not all of it.
That's why I said most. I mean, there's some rules, there's some tech, but really, it's the flavor that just makes this book shine.
Yeah.
If you're looking for some kind of inspiration for a different direction to take your Cyberpunk game, this is where you'll find it.
Yep. And at the end of the chapter, they have a map of the U.S., which I don't know. I know we are in the U.S. and the company Artosorian is U.S. based, but it would have been nice to have seen like all of North America, right? Because I think in the future, a lot of the borders just aren't there anymore, and they're very blurred.
It's a reprinting of the map from, Land of the Free.
Yep.
And this book really, if you've got Neotribes, you really also want to have Home of the Brave, because they kind of bookend each other. Neotribes is all about the fringe society living in the rural areas of America, and so you want a greater grasp of America that the Home of the Brave source book provides, especially if you're nomads traveling from state to state. So yeah, seeing the map reprinted with extra Nomad notes is great. It's not such an issue now, but man, the only complaint I have about this map, and it's the same complaint I had about the Land of the Free map, is it doesn't list the state names on the states, which, because there's new states like Northern California, Southern California, and like the state, some of the boundaries have changed a little bit. It would be nice if they threw some clarity in there. Plus,
you don't remember your geography from third grade?
Yeah, geography's not necessarily my strong point here. I know where most of the states are, but you start getting up into those little tiny New England bullshit, and it starts getting hard to tell which one's which.
Well, so being from the Northeast,
you've the other coast.
I often hear people like, "Oh, where are you from? Connecticut." "Oh, where's that?" "Oh, it's in the Northeast, New England." It's like, "Oh, so you're from the state of New England?" It's like, there is no state of New England.
I blame the Patriots for that, along with many other things.
Yeah, it's Boston pretty much is the big city that after New York.
Yeah.
The rest of it is the wilds of New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine.
I mean, shit, this map is handy. I like this map.
Yeah.
I like the notes that they've placed on it that pertain to nomads, because what pertains to most of your Cyberpunk characters, like your 2020 characters, if they do leave Night City, they're just pretty much usually going to other large cities. I like the areas in between.
Yeah.
Like, that is just untapped potential.
And then the second chapter actually gets into the 7 nations, or 8 nations, as it were, of the Nomads. And kind of goes into detail with them. I am constantly expanding upon these ideas in my games. I did it with Nomad. I did it with Nomad Market, where I went into greater detail about what these nations are. And I further expanded that with Dust in the Wind.
I love the way they've broken this stuff up, and let's go ahead and take it one at a time.
Sure.
The first nation they go into is the Snake Nation. The Snake Nation is what most PCs are typically going to fall into. They're basically, that's your lone wolf. Yeah, lone wolf nomads. Smaller families that aren't beholden to any real cause or predictability for that matter. Like the other nations, they've all got their niches. This is what they do. Typically, this is their purview. The Snake Nation just kind of is everybody else.
Yep, it's a conglomeration with one guy who believes or thinks he's or they nominated as their leader, but he's not really their leader.
Well, yeah, because there is no leader. They have a, the way I expanded on it with the with my source books online at Data Fortress is that the snakes just kind of elect some representatives to on the Nomad councils to keep things running smoothly and to represent the unrepresented nomads.
Yeah. And one of the things I really liked about, well, a lot of the background stuff is how R. Talsorian and all the various authors and writers took the current state of what was going on in the U.S. and tried to extrapolate how the various cultures from various areas in the States
Yeah.
evolved into either the Nomads or some other organization and taking that on. But yeah, the Snake Nation to me is definitely a modge podge of the more, I don't know, unorganized families and clans within the whole nomad community. But it's interesting because the Jodes and some of the not the Jodes, the Jodes and there was one other nation that I was reading about. They kind of have the same mentality in which they're kind of all different organizations, and slowly they came together to form this nation.
Yeah. I made some slight changes in the way I interpret this stuff.
Yeah.
Just so there wasn't, me in redundancy.
Yep.
So for me, the Snake Nation just became this union for dudes who don't want to be part of a union.
Yeah. And then following up with that,
really feel like I feel like the Snake Nation should have been described after the other nations. I get it needed to either be first or last, and I think it would have been better if it was last.
well, I think they put it first
in the
because it's
book.
the biggest one, right?
Yeah, by far, because it's yeah. Yeah, every little biker club or agricultural family or whatever who doesn't want to be beholden to a larger group, this is where they all end up.
Yeah.
So whether it be the lone biker, like I said, most of the largest number of Cyberpunk 2020 Nomad PCs typically come from the Snake Nation because it's less for the player to think about. And if the player is just playing a Nomad in a typical Cyberpunk 2020 game, it's less effort overall for everybody involved. They still get the richness of being a Nomad without having to worry about greater ideals and allegiances.
Yep. And then you have the Jodes.
The Jodes. I like the Jodes. I like the idea of the. Well, I mean, I'm going to say that for every freaking one of these nations. You're just going to have to get used to it, people. Yeah, the Jodes are cool.
So they're more of an agri-pack nomad clan.
Yeah, they're the migrant agricultural workers. They're the fruit pickers and rogue farmers. Like everybody wants to treat Cyberpunk like, okay, well, there's no fresh produce anymore unless you're a corporate, but that doesn't make any sense to me because there's still, even with all the problems that have gone down in Cyberpunk 2020 America, there are still vast swaths of rural landscape where, you know, you can put up your own farm and keep it out of touch enough that you can still grow shit. And nomads are going to do that. They're going to sell their goods. They're going to have quite a lucrative business selling organic produce to like the high-end restaurants. Or they're going to be migrant families who do work for the corporations because,
Well,
you know, it can't all come from prison labor.
so I think the concept around farming is that there is no land really owned by private citizens anymore, right? The land was gobbled up by the megacorps, whether they wanted to use it for producing food or housing people or just have land, right? Because it is a commodity. It's a very
Sure, but
scarce
what's owned
commodity
on
that, you know,
paper and what like outlaws actually can take advantage of are, pardon me, two different things. I got some burps right now.
right. So I don't
Okay.
see the and again, you know, because of the droughts that happened in the 20 teens, that basically destroyed the majority of farming land in the Midwest. Yes, there's probably farming land on either coast, but again, I think the corporations bought up as much of the land as they could. So therefore, I don't think there is a concept of a private farmer or even a nomad family owning a piece of land.
Well, I mean, like I said, it's an outlaw thing in my eyes. Like we're going to disagree on this, but I see nomad farms as not being these, like they don't own the land. Um, they find a piece of arid land and they cultivate it and they try and keep it under the radar, knowing that at any point the corporations can swoop in and just bulldoze it to the ground or steal all their hard work.
Yeah.
But there's going to be enough land that finding small patches and being able to farm out the land, even you know, run cattle and have a ranch. Like these are going to be, they're not going to be huge, which is why the Jodes are one of the smaller nations.
Right.
But it's still going to be viable. I mean, yeah, there was a drought and it fucked up America's farmland, but it's not the first time that's happened in America. We had the Dust Bowl. We bounced back from it. Eventually, like, you bounce back from anything, really.
There's other things happening during the Dust Bowl besides just the Dust Bowl.
Well, sure. I'm just saying, you know, there was also massive die-offs, which means there's less food that you have to worry about producing. The idea of rogue farms and all that is one I'm personally very interested in. And you will, not to spoil anything for upcoming games, but that will become a part of the Nomad game that I'm running you on.
I got a sneak peek.
You got a sneak peek. Yeah. Probably not the last one that's gonna happen while we're reviewing this book, but plus, like I said, like not all the corporate farm labor, not all of that's going to come from prisons. Like there's always going to be a market for, skilled laborers who are willing to work off the books and under the table. That's capitalist America in a nutshell. And corporations are going to demonize nomads while at the same time exploiting them every bit as much as they can.
Right. Yeah, and then also in the Jode section, they talk about the wildling concept, which I think takes a page from like the Amish and the Mennonites, in which
Yeah.
the teenagers go off and live in the rural world for a year or so, and then come back.
Yeah, it's the Rumspringer. It's the nomad version of that kinda. But even more than that, it's like the wilding is not. It's in the Jode section, but it's not tied to any one nation. It's nomads get a hankering for what life is like in the city and go give it a shot, or they just want to cause some problems. That's the other upside is, sometimes that's, the dare. I mean, nomads, they like to have fun just as much as anybody else. If part of being on the move all the time means that you don't have roots, you don't have any online, you're off the grid, as it were. Sometimes going into the city and fucking some shit up is the way to kill a weekend.
And again, those, they use that kind of concept to kind of make the refs and the players understand, hey, this is another area in which your nomad character can come from, or why he is in Night City or whatever location.
Yeah, it's a great concept. It is definitely, you can start a whole campaign just off of one of these incidents. It could be a way to introduce a nomad character to the larger group, to whatever your group of edgerunners currently is. It can. Yeah, it's something you should definitely take a look at if you're looking for ideas. Wilding is fun, and there's no single definition for what wilding is, but it's also one of the reasons that nomads as a whole are all treated like the rap and shiv, is because occasionally even the good nomads go a little bit apeshit.
Then we get into the Bloods Nation, which I think is the most fun nation, and how it was developed throughout the years.
Yeah, it's got some pretty weird starts. Basically, it hypothesizes, well, America collapsed. What happened to Disney World?
Well, it's not that. They started off as literally the Bloods of
sure.
Podsolid.
I mean,
and they eventually migrated into
Disney World. Like that's part of the whole. I don't know why, but that a bunch of gangbangers taking over Disney World and becoming nomads in that regard just amuses me to no end. When I was first reading the book way back in the 90s, they were of all the nations, they were the ones I had the hardest time wrapping my head around. But as I've gotten older, they make the most sense. They went from being gangbangers to being mobile entertainers. They are, I hate to use the term gypsy, and I'm not meaning this as a slur, but more like the classic interpretation of it, where just, wandering
Nomads.
carnival folk, basically. Yeah, the original nomads. Um, they get by going from place to place and putting on shows and putting on fairs, and like these are where your Grateful Dead type nomads come into play. Uh, Plus, they've still got all the gangster contacts. I mean, those are just a lot of a lot of gangs in the cyberpunk world, and
Yep.
the Bloods. While the actual Cyberpunk 2020 book doesn't try to tie itself into any real world gangs, this is in fact one of the very few times in the Cyberpunk 2020 franchise that they do that. They do it effectively.
Well, the other thing, and this is going back some time, is actually using Disney and Walt Disney Corporation. Today's standards, you can't enter
Yeah, you gotta
products.
you gotta allude and like Ricky Rat instead of Mickey Mouse. I mean, but they also talk about, they incorporate the Ringling Brothers and Barnum Bailey circus into it. Like that's part of the Blood Nation.
Also, little did they know
circus.
that the circus would be dead by the turn of the century.
Yeah, pretty much. Like you don't see a lot of circuses anymore. Or what you do see, I was never a personal fan of the circus. Just they're very tacky. I like the idea of them. I like the talent involved.
Yep.
But I don't like clowns. And then Cirque du Soleil came along, and I was like, well, wow, okay. It doesn't have to be tacky. It can be super artistic and awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, that all falls under the purview of the Nomads. And, even Cirque du Soleil, which is as artistic and I don't want to say high class because that sounds pretentious as fuck, but yeah, you get what I'm talking about. Even they would fall under the purview of nomad culture.
Yep.
It's a traveling show.
I mean, in today's age, if we had to rewrite it, I could definitely base the Bloods more out of Las Vegas than Disney. Because I think Las Vegas, with the amount of and the variety of shows and talent and just putting on shows.
I mean, Vegas has got its own set of problems, and who's to say that the Bloods didn't take advantage of that?
Yeah.
I think they started it with Disney, with Florida, just because, well, Disney's a huge complex, and it's basically its own city. I mean, Disney, when you look past the surface of it being an amusement park, the complex is actually kind of terrifying. They've got like a huge system of tunnels underneath and access to all this technology that makes for interesting cyberpunk plots. And the fact that it's spread out across America, so yeah, they could definitely throw down big roots in Vegas. Water parks across the country. I mean, Six Flags is out there.
Yep.
I like the idea of traveling nomad circuses where, most kids are never gonna, like, zoos aren't as big of a thing. Like, they never talk about zoos in the cyberpunk world. So, like,
well, the whole concept that the majority of animals died off, right?
Yeah. But I could see some nomads, like, still having maybe an old elephant that they care for and that. I can see it. Like, these are plot points that run around in my head. Not necessarily maybe the same for other people. But then again, with Data Fortress, I wasn't as strict with some of the timeline as some people would have liked. My interpretation is my interpretation.
Yep.
I try and keep as much as I can compatible with what's going on in the cyberpunk world, but I've never made I've never even tried to pretend that it's a 100% like what's written in the books is the same as what's in my game. In fact, I contradict that stuff all the time.
Yeah, for
Either out of
me,
fun.
with like
Go ahead.
zoos and why zoos would have disappeared is, after the crash when what a third of America was now made homeless. I could see riots and people breaking into zoos and basically butchering the animals for meat, just because, and that kind
I
of
can see that in a
craziness.
lot of the zoos, but I can also see in other zoos like whole militias forming of people who want to protect the animals.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, people love their critters. I love my critters. Um, yeah, and if I were a zookeeper, I've known some people who work in zoos and in like animal sanctuaries and stuff. Their love for those animals, they'd kill some motherfuckers to protect them. And I would support that. Yeah.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's the thing with Nomads is it takes all kinds, and there's as many plot ideas for Nomads as you can pull out of the air, honestly.
Yeah. And now the next nation is the meta nation. And I to me, I reading the history, I understand why they're kind of a or considered a nomad group, but for me, they're not anywhere near nomad anymore. Right? It's
I mean, the whole point behind Meta is that they're like this militaristic corporation that formed out of a bunch of vets from the South American conflict. Um, I expand on that with Dust in the Wind and Nomad Market, just to bring them back more in line with the Nomad concept. And that sure, that's they're made up of veterans, and yeah, they're the corporate arm of the Nomad community. But in my eyes, in addition to this militaristic aspect of them, and they act as the liaison between the other nomad nations and the corporations who employ them, just to bring it back more in line. So yeah, they look a little bit more professional. They sell products. They have their own arms manufacturing and all that. Um, but at the same time, they're working for the betterment of the nomad community. Uh, in my eyes, because they're all survivors of the long walk, and
well, I get that, right? That they traveled, and however, like in the book, they created their own man-made island, and to me, I often think of what are they called? Not meta island.
Metakeys.
Is it? Yeah, Meta-Key.
Yeah, that's
Kind
what
of
the
like Olympia of Appleseed, right? And it's a very
uh
controlled city that has external people
that's
coming in, but it's also very ruled kind of that way.
yeah, that's not really how I've ever seen it. Personally, for me, Metakey is just they in the Gulf of Mexico. They've taken over some oil well or some abandoned oil rigs, and brought in boats and basically just created this giant floating city out in the middle of the ocean. And while they obviously control the governing of said place, I mean it's like a nomad safe haven offshore outside the purview of the United States. It's I I don't know. I see it as these giant floating rust things similar to Waterworld,
Mm.
the floating cities in Waterworld. That's how I see it more. Like it's governed by the meta, and like they obviously keep it supplied and whatnot. But I would imagine that any meta key itself is just as full of the thetas as metas. Um,
Well,
Plus any nomad who goes on the road, like it would be the perfect waypoint for what I'd term the nomad underground railroad.
yeah, but for me, you're not a nomad nation if you have your own island and you have your own home base.
Well, I mean, it's like the nomad markets. You gotta, if you're gonna have any kind of corporation at all, you've got to have some central point of shipping and consolidation. It's and even in the book they describe like these are not your typical nomads. These
Yeah,
they kind of have their own agenda. Um, I don't know. It adds variety. It adds flavor. Um, Plus, it's nomads who hire themselves out as mercenaries. Having a bunch of mercenaries you can rely on that corporations or other shady groups can rely on who are completely off the books, completely like plausible deniability is the name of the game with the meta. Like you can hire a meta squad and send them to certain doom, and as long as the pay goes through, nobody really gonna say anything.
yep. Yeah, so meta are basically the corporization of the nomad, of one nomad nation, I think.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of the veterans flock to. I can see a lot of meta hiring themselves out as outriders for and security for other nomad families. Um, that's their specialty is corporate liaisons and military force and technology. That's what they do.
Now we move into the made famous by Cyberpunk 2077, the Aldecados.
They have always been my favorite nomad family. The Aldecaldos, they focus on smuggling. They are your typical, like when you think of nomads as they're what you think of. They moving from place to place. They do the interstate shipping, the smuggling. Uh, I love Aldecaldos so much, and for them to have such a high focus in Cyberpunk 2077, where I'm basically playing the video game version of as close to my favorite PC as I can get. Yeah, it just makes me. I want to squeal like a little girl. I'm trying to restrain myself right now. I love the Aldecaldos so very much. Um,
Yeah, and I think like the Snake Nation, they're kind of another atypical nomad, right? When people think of it.
I mean, yeah, they're your stereotypical uh, like I said, they're the nomads who are they're always on the move. They're what you think of when you think of nomads. Large convoys moving people and things from place to place. Sometimes above the books, private contractors and shippers, and smugglers. They're the ones who know all the secret byways and highways of America. They're my favorite nomad family. And you first got they're also what you first got a glimpse of in the 2020 source book with or even the 2013 source book with
Santiago.
Nomad Santiago, who later becomes the leader of the Aldecaldos. Yeah.
Yeah, a little history is Johnny Silverhand and Rogue hooked up with this group when they fled back in 2013 after blowing up. Well, they didn't blow up Arasaka at that time, but
Yeah, in the
riots.
short story Fade Away,
Yeah.
which you get to replay in the Cyberpunk 2077 video game. You get to meet Nomad Santiago. He's very much downplayed, but that's because the video game, the flashbacks are told from Johnny's point of view, where he's, of course, going to downplay the importance of Nomad Santiago and his relationship with Rogue. And, promote himself, which is why he one-shot kills everything, because Johnny Silverhand is an egoist who... he's just a total fucking narcissist is what he is.
Well, he also has a very big gun. Very deadly gun. So...
Well, yeah, the Malorian Arms 3516, which was... You find out about that in Chromebook 1. Like, it was specially made for Johnny, and then Malorian just decided to start selling them on their own.
And next we have the Thalas Nation, which is the Marathon Nomads, similar to the Snake Nation.
I called them Theta, but I meant Thela.
Thelas. Oh,
Thelas.
Yeah. Like good Thelas.
Honestly, these would be... the Thelas Nation is huge. And it covers all your, fishermen, aquatic smugglers, shippers, like anybody who's not tied down to, like, anyone who's not actively employed by a corporation, who works the water lanes is going to be a Thelas.
Yep.
And
I know they talk a little bit about pirates versus who they are, but I could also
because the RAF and Shiv operate on the water as much as they do everywhere else. If you've ever been to a coastal town, there's going to be the shipping or the fishing community in that coastal town is a very tight knit group. Even if they're selling their wares to corporations, they keep it as private as possible. They are very distrusting of outsiders. I know I used to, and they're often made up of minorities, ethnic minorities. When I lived on the Gulf Coast, like in the 80s, Vietnamese fishermen were made up huge communities in Mississippi and Louisiana, Alabama.
Yep.
All along the Gulf Coast, there were these huge Vietnamese communities. There were still ethnic Cajun and Creole fishing communities. If you head north to like Maine or on the other side of the world, or other side of the U.S., like Alaska and Washington, those coastal communities have huge fishing communities. Really, that all falls under this purview. Private shippers. Really, anybody who does business on the water, they're going to be Thelas. And it's sad that they're so underrepresented in the books, because they would be just ubiquitous, really. Like they're everywhere. Even on the lakes, there would be members who claim allegiance to the Thelas Nation. And the rivers, anybody who plies the waterways, they're. It really is a shame that there isn't more visual representation of nomads on the water, but nobody ever goes on the water inside.
Right, and I could see the Thelas being more multinational than for example, the Aldecados or the Bloods.
Oh, absolutely. Um, yeah, because they shipping and smuggling, like they're the ones who move back and forth from nation to nation. They've got uh, no real boundaries at all. And I could see them being the foothold of the nomad nations into pretty much everywhere else on Earth.
Yep. And then finally we have Folk Nation, which seems like they're more of a ambiguous type of nation.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like they're more geared towards rebuilding and construction, but it also talks about, even getting into transportation like the Aldecados. And
Yeah, there was a lot of overflow, like back and forth between, like the folk and the Aldecados are kind of like it. I kind of reversed them, whereas in this book, actually, I went on a long big rant about Aldecados being the transportation guys, when in reality, in the book, the Aldecados are the salvage and construction guys, and the folk are the construction guys. In my game, I reversed it. It made more sense. And I've been running my game my way for so very long that sometimes I forget that it's contradictory. Mm-hmm. So yeah, in my game, the Folk Nation, and it's hints about this. The Folk Nation is all about construction and salvage. Like they're the ones who go into Chicago. They're the ones who go into Manhattan. If you play in the time of Red, they're the ones who'd be rebuilding Night City. It talks about the folk and their origins as being like part of the black community. I don't know why that's I don't know. It kind of again crosses their origins with the Bloods. So there's just all this kind of weird stuff. So yeah, I kind of in my expansions to the world, I solidified them as the salvage and construction experts. Just it made more sense to me. They've got a very rich history in the book, and I definitely recommend reading it. Yeah.
Agreed. I mean, and that's the thing about all these nations is the history is it's an interesting read on all of them and kind of gives you a better understanding of the nomad culture and the diversity.
Yeah, in my head, all these abandoned communities that, as everybody pushed to get into the cities during the collapse, like they're the ones who go through those old towns and like strip it for everything it's worth.
And of course, the eighth nation, which technically isn't a nation because they
don't have representation.
Is the Raffen Shiv, which is basically the marauders and pirates of the world.
Yeah, they are the Mad Max biker gangs that haunt your post-apocalypse fueled nightmares. They are the Hells Angels. They are really any criminal. They are the criminal element in the nomad community. They don't have, like he said, they're not a nation per se, as they're just the nomads that everybody else doesn't want to associate with. they're your bad guys, folks, and they're good bad guys. They're highly diverse. They're as diverse as you want them to be. They can be anything from the leather-clad bikers to, some hillbillies living in the woods and, hijacking whatever they can. Everything from, like I said, from bikers and from Hell's Angels to, like the Reavers from Firefly would be Raph and Shiv.
Yeah.
All
the enemies
smokers from Waterworld. Yeah. They're the bad guys, folks, and they're fun.
And it's a shame that they were only given less than half a page of
yeah, well, I mean, I'm having a hard time saying they're the bad guys in there's only so many ways you can say they're the bad guys, folks. They're too diverse to try and like rope down with any kind of description, but at the same time they're stereotypical in that they're all the nomads they're all the negative stereotypes of nomads you see out there.
Yep. And I think that's one of the misses of this book is that they didn't really dive into the Raph and Shiv, because they are, definitely opposed to any players group. So to have like generic stats for them, kind of like in Protect and Serve, you had a listing for all the various gangs and what to expect stat-wise from those gang members and what kind of equipment they have.
I actually like that they don't provide like stat examples, because unless you're actually trying to run an adventure, you don't really need that. I mean, they're going to be all over the board. There's no stereotypical stat for a Raph and Shiv or for a gang member. I mean, they'll have some similar equipment within their respective criminal underground groups, but like stat wise, that's going to be all over the place.
I get that, right? I understand that the stat wise they're going to be over the place, especially from at least I want to say realistic view, right? However, you're still looking at a game, right? And the game, and I think it's something that Cyberpunk has always been kind of faulty of, is how can I balance out an encounter, right? And in my opinion, I don't believe in game balance when it comes to NPCs, etc. But there are those referees who do want that example of this is a group that would take on your beginning characters. This is a group that would take on characters with this level of skill, and so on for new referees getting into it, to have a concrete example of, hey, here's a generic, and yes, you can always modify and expand on it and make each one their own. However, you also want at least a base for new referees to go by.
I'll agree that it would have been nice to have, some examples, not necessarily statted, but like just a quick write-up of, personalities of different Raph and Shiv. Like, hey, this guy's, crazy nomad biker, crazy Raph and Shiv biker who he travels up and down these roads, and this is his modus of operandi. And over here we've got, Cannibal Dave who, travels the smugglers' routes looking for wary traveler or unwary travelers. Or we've got, Slick Rick, who is a con man who will hire on with a nomad crew and then rob them blind. It would be nice to have some examples like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't necessarily feel the need to stat out these enemies, because what's going to be appropriate for one group is not going to be appropriate for another. The best arbiter of what the players can handle is going to be the GM. So leave that to his purview. But I do like having character write-ups. I like that. So yeah, I can get on board with what you're saying.
Glad I could convince you. Right, so that kind of wraps up that chapter.
Well, also as part of this chapter, as one of the side blurbs, they talk about nomads and education, and how important education is in the nomad community. And it details how like nomads are typically better educated than everybody else. They have, I don't want to use the term homeschooling because they're very community based, but yeah. One of the resources they constantly pick clean and restock is educational materials. They're training the next generation because they no longer have the state to, like, there's no longer public schools for them. That's not an option. They're constantly on the road, so they're constantly teaching the next generation. Both like, if you want to talk to a historian and not get any kind of corporate bias or political bias, like, talk to a nomad.
Yep. Agreed. And that was one of the definitely takeaways that kind of hit home was, just because the city folk think they're uneducated, unwashed masses roaming the highways, scavenging.
The unwashed part is probably true.
They're also
not really, because I mean, yeah, it's like everybody wants to, like, the static society, the city dwelling, easygoing city folk. They view nomads as being backwoods rednecks. That's not the case. They are more educated than the city folk in general, especially in terms of, like, history. They speak multiple. Most nomads will speak more than one language. They're very literate. A lot of they hoard books. Like, they don't go into much detail about that, but in my game, yeah, nomads hoard books. Any type of literature they can get their hands on, they preserve and protect. There's not a lot of entertainment options on the open road. Not a lot of time for it either. So books are the lifeblood of the community. They don't do a lot of TV. They do books.
Yep. So that's a wrap up on chapter 2. The next chapter gets into creating nomad characters. And this introduced several different types of nomads, similar to Wildside with all the fixer subtypes.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Nomads did it a little more expansive, right? So based upon your role, you got your own special abilities. Whereas family and kith are kind of something that most nomads have, but other nomad types will have the different special abilities, like warriors having warpath,
it was
pathfinders with reconnaissance, and runners with vehicle send.
Yeah, it was these descriptions of roles within the nomad community that really led to the impetus of what I did with roles with Interlock Unlimited, where multiple roles, you can take as many as you want. Because if you're in the Nomad community, sure, you're going to develop a family score. Even if you come in as a solo, you're gonna make the contacts. You're gonna have the loyalty of your family. You're going to be able to call on them. But at your heart, you're still a soldier. You're still the guy charged with being the gunslinger, or you're the doctor in the group. It just multi-classing is in Interlock Unlimited came directly from Neotribes and these special Nomad character roles.
Well, I like the idea that Interface Volume 2, Number 2, I think introduced the concept of a dual role, right? In which they took certain roles, Nomad being one of them, corporate, cop. I want to say there was one more in which you can take one of those roles, and then you can take one of those follow-up roles of, I can be a corporate solo, or I can be a nomad techie, or I can be,
sure,
a lawman netrunner. And having,
I mean, go ahead.
to me, the nomad role, the corporate role, and the lawman role are really a bigger description of your character, in that they are part of an organization, versus what they do within that organization.
I mean, if you dedicate your life to being a representative of that organization, sure, that's at that point it becomes its own role. But most of the people who work and live within that profession or community, they actually do other stuff, like you were saying. Like, if you're in the military, by definition, you've had combat training. But like, even if you're part of a combat squad, there's going to be a medic in there. There's going to be a radio operator. So you got your med tech and your net runner. There's going to be, an officer. You've got your charismatic leader, just as examples. And that's every bit as prevalent in the Nomad community. There's going to be medics. There's going to be educators. There's going to be net runners. There's going to be solos. They're all part of the Nomad community. They all have that jumping on point. And yeah, that media or the interface issue 2 was the perfect stepping stone for what would become the way I do it with Interlock Unlimited. There was a lot of complaining, there was a big philosophy that was just like eliminate the roles altogether, because they tie you down too much to any one thing. And I saw that point of view, but I also had the point of view where, if somebody dedicates their life to something, or dedicates their lives to multiple things, like, they definitely get better at that shit beyond just what would be expected as a skill. Like, it becomes next level for them.
Yep.
I like the idea of roles. I just hate the idea of being tied down to any one role. So, and this book,
the roles and classes and game systems, I know some people are kind of against it because, well, I want the freedom to do whatever I want, which is fine, but oftentimes you'll get a table that is basically a cookie cutter of every single player,
which is, again, why I went the way I did with Interlock Unlimited. So you can, instead of it tying you down to anything, it frees you up for everything.
Right.
While at the same time keeping the idea of roles on the table. Because, like I said, I like the idea of roles. And really, the most important part of this section in Neotribes if you're playing 2020 as written, yes, it kind of lets you multi-class within the Nomad community. But more importantly, it outlines different roles of individuals within the Nomad community. It talks about things that people may not have considered before, like shamans and outriders and scouts and like you said, and runners, wise men, like mechanics, specialists, all these people who make up the Nomad community, who are absolutely essential for that community to run, but nobody ever gives much thought to them as individuals.
Yep.
And this book really fleshes that out. And if you're looking to play a Nomad, it helps you figure out, what role you want your character to play within the Nomad community beyond just, your Cyberpunk 2020 typical edgerunner group.
Exactly. And then the follow-up on this chapter, and one I'm sure you like to see, is an actual life path dedicated towards the nomads.
Oh, Lord. Oh, it's a good one, too. Now, it only really deals with like family background. There's a motivation section, but it's pretty much identical to the one in the book, really. There's not much when it comes down to motivations for your character. That's not really going to change much. But the family background and the life events, that's where this really shines.
Yeah.
It's like the Home of the Brave book that gives you a military background option, life path. Like it lets you plug in and play. Like, okay, well, this year I spent. Even if you're a static, even if you're a city dweller, if for some reason you spent time in the Nomad community, it lets you plug those years into your normal life path. And as a tool for that, it's just kind of priceless.
Yep. And I think Red kind of evolved as well. I mean, Red still everyone has the base family and motivations, enemies and lovers and friends. But I think Red also evolved, or I don't know if they took inspiration from specifically here on getting a role life path, right? But their life path for the role is more specific on how they got that role and what their role involves versus this, which is more family background and history.
I think it's weird. Earlier, when we were talking about metas. Honestly, I think the nomads in Red are like more closely resemble metas than anything else. Like they've become this very organized kind of corporation of their own in Red, as opposed to the 2020 Nomad. Like it talks about nomads like running airlines and shit, and space freighter and like coming back and forth from orbit. And I'm like, wow, those are really well-funded nomads.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would still say that even if you're playing Red, you could probably still get a lot of use out of this book. More so than a lot of the other Cyberpunk 2020 source books, because like books like Night City and Home of the Brave, they're not really going to be relevant in the time of Red, because, well, like Night City no longer looks anything like that, and the Home of the Brave, like that history is all way in the past. But Nomads, like this book, along with like Wildside, like Nomads, Fixers, you're always going to want to be able to have a better look into that lifestyle.
Yep. And the next chapter is Nomad Equipment. and it goes from the mundane, right, which is all the way down to like the gun cleaning kit, uh, bungee cords, and all like the minutia gear that is out there, which I know some playgroups do not care for. They they don't want the micromanagement or the microeconomy at times, but um,
I can get that with other styles of play, but in a Nomad game where basically if your character doesn't have it on him or on his vehicle, they don't have it at all.
right,
Like that minutia becomes important. And what the gear section really does more than anything else is it kind of points out the kind of stuff that would be important to nomads that, maybe players wouldn't think of. Things like distillation rigs and water purifiers, like those things are incredibly important, but maybe players wouldn't think of that. Um, Especially, younger players or players who don't do a lot of camping or traveling, like they wouldn't think of this kind of stuff. That's absolutely essential for survival.
yep.
Um,
And I like how they broke down the vehicle types, right? Um,
yeah,
and what that vehicle's role would be within the family and the convoy.
yeah, and then they go on to like they list specific vehicles. But I mean, they're nomad vehicles and they're all hand cobbled together. So they're really just examples of stuff as opposed to, they're not manufactured like this. This is just what they are. Different types. This kind of motorcycle it has this use within the nomad community. Or this dune buggy over here makes for a great scout vehicle. Whereas this bread truck looking thing is great for hauling gear. I would have really liked a nomad version of Maximum Metal where they talk about, give rules for vehicle construction. I think that's one of the areas that the book kind of lacked.
Well, I mean,
Is
vehicle is a vehicle, right? Um,
well, sure,
so
a vehicle
stat-wise,
is a vehicle.
I don't see too much of a difference between max metal and any other vehicle that would be in game, right?
Here's the thing with that. I do, and that's because with Max Metal, like they're manufactured to be these armored vehicles. That is what it is. I'm not talking about necessarily stat wise. I'm talking about some rules for, like hodgepodging and like scavenging materials and throwing, like using stop signs as makeshift armor on the side of your car, or what would the what would the what would the rules look like for wrapping the roof of your van in barbed wire so people can't jump on it, things like that. That's supercharging the engine.
Coming up with a RAM device or
Yeah,
chicken
adding
wire
adding
net type of
catcher to the
device.
front of your truck. I mean, simple things like that. I would have liked to have seen rules in the book for that. Because it's different when you're doing it when you're just like grabbing shit and scavenging shit and welding it onto your car, as opposed to what you're gonna get at a car dealership.
Yep.
And I would have liked to have seen those rules represented somewhere. We haven't mentioned it so far, but holy shit, do I love the art for this book. Like, overall, I think this book has the best art in the whole franchise. Well, maybe not the best, but it's definitely top 3.
It's more consistent, I think, than other
Yeah,
books.
it's very consistent. It's all the artists seem to be on the same page and at about the same, I don't want to say level of talent, but definitely the same like area of influence and style.
Yeah.
Uh,
Let's see how many.
and it's got a lot of the veterans like Malcolm He, who and David Ackerman. Like they're very very well represented here. The cover by Mark Schumann, like this cover, the cover to Neotribes, the cover to Home of the Brave, and the cover to Land of the Free, all kind of like fit together.
Yep. Of what America looks like outside of the city. Yeah, so any other things in the equipment? And the other thing I liked with this supplement versus like Wild Side and some of the others is it kind of condensed the various, I would say, game mechanics versus the fluff and background versus equipment and kind of centralize that. So if you pick up this source book, you know, you don't have to hunt through whatever pages to get to that one item that was listed in a blurb in the side panel
Yeah.
on page 53 that had
Oh,
nothing to do with what
Fortune
you were.
books are
Yeah.
freaking awful about that.
Well,
I get that they were
Fortune
trying to
is,
make it look like a magazine, so it works within that context. But if you're trying to frantically find something, it's a nightmare.
yeah,
Whereas here, like you said, it's all centralized.
yeah, and Wild Side I think is, yeah, it kind of condensed the different tech and the subject headings, but it would have been nice to have an appendix similar to what they do here with the chapter, is condense it all into one place so a person doesn't have to go hunting and pecking through the book to find it. But that is one thing I liked about this particular book. The next chapter is actually running Nomads and gives you kind of advice on how to run a Nomad campaign or on how to deal with Nomads in a group. Yeah, and again, it's just like Listen Up, You Primitive Screwhead. Great material for the referees and giving you inspiration.
It's a great material for players. Like everybody should read this section, even if you don't get any use out of the rest of the book. If you're going to play a Nomad, you need to understand this kind of stuff. You need to. It helps you visualize how Nomads fit into the world of Cyberpunk 2020 as individuals, and that's as important as it gets. I mean, they're one of the primary roles, and this is the level of detail you need to really flesh that out.
Yep.
Plus, it's just a great read. Like this is yeah, it's great advice, and it's great fluff. It's fun.
Also, the thing that really I enjoy that our Talsorian did in most of their splat books was, maybe not most, but some, actually having a filmography and a bibliography.
Yeah, a little bit of inspiration to get your game going.
Yep. So you can actually go off and read a particular book or go see a movie and that will give you inspiration on your campaign. Although in this one, with one of the filmographies, is Escape from New York. I could kind of see like Graf and Shiv,
Nomad,
but
yeah. But I mean, they've got some other less obvious choices, like Grapes of Wrath.
Yeah.
Like Grapes of Wrath is really the ultimate nomad. Like this is what life would be like, living as a nomad, moving from place to place constantly. Food always being scarce, but nobody, like your typical like cyberpunk player wouldn't think of that. And that's really the blessing of this book, is it thinks of shit that isn't typically, like, it doesn't immediately come to mind when thinking of a Cyberpunk 2020 source inspiration.
Yep. So that wraps up that chapter. The next chapter is sample packs or families, and they give 4 of them, and which kind of gives you inspiration. And I guess it goes back to that point earlier around the Raff and Shiv and not having an example of it. The packs do get into a little bit of the culture of the pack, as well as kind of gives you a general idea of what the pack owns, and what an individual within that pack would usually be carrying. And the packs are the gargoyles, which gargoyles are a construction pack. The lanes, which are an agri pack. Force of Nature is more or less Native American. And then the Technomancers, which I often use in my game. The Technomancers are at least an offshoot of that type of group. Just because I like the concept of high-tech family, going from city to city, taking the electronics that were left behind and the tech that was left behind, and coming up with an alternative high-tech society, but in a nomad lifestyle.
I like these examples. I mean, the Blaines are really just your generic, typical, like, agricultural family, but it's a good write-up of them. Like, it gives a good, rich history. Like, it's something you could plug into your game, and like everybody can immediately relate to that.
Yeah. And I love the
same
art
with the
example for the
gargoyles.
Blaines.
Yeah, the art example is fantastic. It really evokes that Grapes of Wrath feel.
Yep.
The Force of Nature. I mean, nobody thinks about, the Native American community in Shadowrun is a big deal, but in Cyberpunk 2020, it's kind of overlooked a lot. So having that representation here is nice.
Well, I think they do talk about it, and it might be part of the folk nation that kind of absorbed a little bit of that culture into them.
Well, I mean, yeah. And the Snake Nation. But the folk, yeah. The weird one are the Technomancers, and I love the idea of the Technomancers so much that I expanded on them and eventually ended up kind of taking them in a weird direction. But like the art for it just evoked this. I love the Technomancers. The art is very evocative of Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's basically, it was Hayao Miyazaki's magnum opus, which is the guy behind like Mononoke and Howl's Moving Castle and all that. It was his very first work, and it's what made him famous. But like all the characters wear these crazy air filters on their face, and the chick in the picture is wearing one that looks just like, it came from that anime or manga. And it talks about them just having this like innate ability to work with machines and I personally like just ran with that. And yeah, if you want to, you can read my version of the Technomancers on both Dust in the Wind and Nomad Market write-ups. But yeah, I very much liked these sample packs, and the write-ups it gave them. They're very rich in history.
Welcome back, games.
Oh, I was gonna say I didn't go anywhere. Yeah, any of these you can plug and play right into your campaign, and they're written well enough that it just is a springboard for more.
Yep. Or even developing an offshoot, like I did.
Yeah.
Right? So I have a nomad family that the group has encountered called the Tribe of the Gear, right? And their premise is they're great with drones and remotes. So they have
Nice.
a lot of techies and net runners in the organization. So, yeah, definitely great little fluff, and kind of takes it from the nations to a smaller level. So you can think about how to create a family based off of what you've learned in the previous pages of this book. And then the final chapter, which is basically a 14-page scenario around Chicago. It gets into a little bit of the background of Chicago, and then, and I must apologize, it's been decades since I've actually read this, and I started reading this book again. However, I couldn't get to this chapter before the show, so I know at kind of a high level that there's a corporation, the Storm Technologies, looking to salvage Chicago, and players are basically wrapped up into the going on rebuilding that city.
A little bit of a backstory for listeners who are not as familiar with the Cyberpunk 2020 world and haven't read Home of the Brave. Chicago was the site of a bioplague that pretty much wiped the city out, and the government, even before the collapse, just kind of abandoned Chicago. They walled it off, nobody in or out, and just left it to rot, which is why, of course, this adventure, which is the premise of this adventure, is that, you know, the players are part of a nomad group going in to salvage what's left of Chicago. It's a good adventure. It led directly to what was the greatest single game I ever ran.
So did you actually
as part of
this scenario?
I didn't run the scenario. Well, I ran the scenario, yes, but I kind of like just quickly got through it to get to. They kind of talk about the Sears Tower and about, you know, strange things going on, and nobody wants to get near it. They don't make that necessarily part of the adventure, like focus on it or anything, but that's where my adventure went. Like I used this as a springboard to get to what my players still talk about to this day, which was the raid on Sears Tower. Where in my game, in the adventure I was running, I had written Sears Tower is being taken over by the survivors of Chicago, and it became this giant, like, a cannibal fortress where, you know, anybody who's foolish enough to enter Chicago basically becomes lunch for the people, for what few survivors are left living in the Chicago Tower. And because the bottom floors, with the exception of some secret ways in or out known by the people who live there was no way, like, the players couldn't figure out how to get in, so they had to parachute in from above, and then it was just them running the gauntlet from the top of the Sears Tower to the bottom, basically. But what made it memorable?
inspiration from, what was that movie, The Raid?
No, this was I did this in the 90s. Um, I don't remember exactly what my inspiration was. I mean, a little bit, I guess, Escape from New York. Um, but really, it just was. It was more of a horror. It was the first time I ever ran a horror-based campaign. Um, it was real slow. We turned off the lights. Just the players had flashlights because it was dark and like all the craziness. Um, and they kept coming across these crazy totems made out of wire and shit. Uh, at one point, they were coming down a hallway, and the sun was coming up on the other side, and so all they see is this crazy bloated silhouette of a person just kind of floating in the air, and nobody wants to approach it. It just kind of moves and make noise every now and then. And like one of the players got so freaked out, we had to like turn on the lights and like give him a minute. I didn't intentionally trigger this guy, and in hindsight, I feel kind of bad about it, but like he got seriously freaked out over it. He had just seen, we had just gone to see Blair Witch Project.
Oh, okay.
And it was still early enough that they were touting the Blair Witch Project as, you know, this real thing that happened, and the footage was real and all that. So we had that imagery fresh in our heads, and I was playing on that. And it turned out that the thing was just a bunch of wires in the shape of a human being, like suspended by thin wires, just as a totem. But it freaked them out. They were approaching it inch by inch. They were throwing things at it. It was good stuff. It was the most memorable game I've ever run. It sounds kind of stupid in description, but it was a good game.
Yeah, this wasn't Cyberpunk, but I had a similar experience in which some of the players and the GM kind of got triggered. So basically, it was the FASA Star Trek RPG, and the GM was kind of trying to make, I don't know, tried to put horror into Star Trek. So there was I forget, one of the red shirts who was dying on the operating table and then died. And we found out he was doing some sabotage, and he was into like Satanism. And all of a sudden, you know, the GM at the time was like, oh, all of a sudden his stat, you know, his readout goes to normal. He sits straight up in the chair with like bloodshot eyes and like trying to portray horror. And all of a sudden, all the lights went out in the house. So there was like a blackout, a powder outage. And I'm sitting there going, doo-doo-doo, you know, making little scary noises. And both the other player and the GM were like, shut up. And when the lights came on, like an hour later, they were like, okay, he falls back down and dies. I'm like, what? Of course, this was back when I was still a teenager or tween. But yeah, you can trigger people. Very interesting. Even though you don't think, you know, you think it's a game, but.
I mean, and sometimes, you know, triggering them it's like going to a horror movie. Sometimes that's a beneficial outcome. Other times it's like there's good triggers and bad triggers, even with horror. We talked about like some things you don't want to trigger. And we've talked about that extensively in the past. Hell, that was the basis of one of our early shows.
Yeah. Good old days.
Them good old days.
Yeah, so that's pretty much it for Neotribes. I like that there's a 14-page scenario, and basically it's a campaign.
Yeah, I mean it's a good long, like, you can run several episodes on this, and it can definitely lead into like an ongoing, you know, campaign. It's the perfect kind of jumping on point for a beginning Nomad game.
Yeah. So overall,
I feel
good.
I feel like we should tackle one of the more controversial aspects of the book.
Which is?
Um, there's a quote in the book that often gets taken out of context, and I'm trying to find it. It's in the history.
Oh, yes, the history on how
In the very first,
America collapsed because it was all about the me generation. I don't think they
yeah,
used the me generation, but it turned into, hey, everyone feels entitled and everyone feels special, and that was the cause of the collapse of the U.S.
I've never asked him about it. Um, I've never pressed him on the issue, so I don't know. But I get the feeling like the section we're talking about is on page 7. There's a little blurb or there's a couple of paragraphs under the heading of diversity and unity,
Yes.
and it's taken out of context by assholes who just want to be assholes, basically. Um, they'll quote this one small part where they'll quote, "It is now accepted among historical scholars that in decades before the collapse, America suffered from the sickness of racism and cultural identity, everyone wanting to be seen as special. Every group had to be equal or preferably better than its neighbors and fought to protect its special rights. And if anyone had something that anyone else wanted, they were painted as racist, sexist, elitist, or worse. This divisive me-first attitude eventually tore the fabric of American culture apart and caused it to self-destruct in a fireball of competing ideologies, none of which truly recognized each other's validity. Diversity led inexorably to anarchy." I fucking hate when this quote gets brought up because it's just taken as that. And it's seen from a very myopic point of view, and knowing Ross, I'm pretty sure that was written by the other guy. It's also falsely attributed to being part of the Cyberpunk 2020 source book a lot, and to as being written by Mike Sponsmith. Neither of those things are true.
Right.
The book is, as a whole, and in fact Cyberpunk 2020 as a whole, is very anti-racist. It's very much about individuality
And diversity.
And diversity. I mean, the entire ethos of Cyberpunk 2020 is style over substance. That is a very individualistic point of view to take. As that same chapter, in the very next paragraph, it talks about how important diversity is, especially among the Nomad community. Yep. So these right-wing assholes want to bring this stuff up when everywhere else in the entire franchise they talk about how important diversity is, how important inclusiveness. Like, they don't use the word inclusiveness, but they definitely give the impression of, everything is represented here, and that's just the way it is. It's a very cyberpunk as a genre in itself is going to take it's going to be seen from the viewpoint of the individual, and how important the individual is as a whole. While at the same time, that individual is being crushed under the depths of, an oppressive system, an oppressive state, or a corporate power. It is the individuals banding together to fight that make up what the cyberpunk ethos is.
Yep. Right. So
I had to bring that up because I see it get put up a lot to the point that, like, I actually had like copy pasted like quotes from the books that completely contradict that one little fucking paragraph
Yep.
that really doesn't fit anywhere. I don't know why it exists. I've never understood it. Even in the context of the book, it's so out of place with the rest of what's going on that it just kind of hurts. I mean, the Cyberpunk books as a whole feature. They were promoting inclusiveness really before any other game systems I'd ever seen. I've talked earlier. We've talked about how in the adventure book, Tales from the Forlorn Hope, that our little podcast is kind of takes a riff off of. One of the main NPCs is transgender, and she was the first transgender character I'd ever seen in an RPG, and she was treated with respect and dignity.
Yep.
It wasn't a joke. Hell, it's one of the other source books, When Gravity Fails, based off the Alec Effinger books. They feature transgender characters, and they are not treated as jokes. They're fully fleshed out characters. Minorities of all types, sexualities of all types are fully represented in these books, and they were done so at a time when that was really unheard of in the RPG circles. Like,
yeah, agreed.
So, sorry about that little rant there. It just felt like it was important because, like I said, that quote gets brought up a lot, and it's always by people who don't understand the game or the context within it.
It also shows you that this comment has been around for ages. Even you can even read, like, I forget if it's Plato or one of the Greek theologians. He basically talks about society and how society is, and even about kids. How kids are running amok and doing all this crazy stuff, and no one controls them. And again, you can see through the ages, these things are always brought up, and they're always there. And
I mean, honestly, when your argument is that showing fair representation to everybody is a bad thing, you kind of lost before you started.
Right. Okay, so anything else around Neotribes? Other than you should have this book if you're doing anything Nomad?
I mean, it's in my top 5 Cyberpunk 2020 supplements of all time, especially as far as like the splat books go, like the fluff material. Like this, Home of the Brave, and Night City are my 3 favorite source books that are non-tech oriented.
Whereas I would replace Neotribe with Wildside,
and
because I'm a city boy.
Actually, I would replace Home of the Brave with Wildside. Yeah. Or I would just add Wildside as number 4. That's the trick right there. Wildside is number 4.
Yeah.
Or at least a tie, in a 4-way tie for the same place, because I love all these books. But my love for Neotribes is obvious to anybody who's been to Datafortress2020 or anybody who's ever talked to me about Nomads at all. I love this book. I love the art. I love the fluff. I love the technical information. There is nothing about this book that I don't love, except that one paragraph.
You heard it from us. Definitely get this book. Just cut out or black out the paragraph on page 7, and you'll be good. So wrapping up. Next time, we haven't solidified a specific topic. So one of the topics that I think we whether or not we get a possible interview with someone in the community. We might be doing an AMA of the Interlock Unlimited rule set that was created by Wisdom and a plethora of other people as well.
I love collaborative efforts.
Yep. So we'd like to thank Rob over at Cyberpunk Nation for hosting us on his Twitch channel. You can catch me on my cybersmily.net site, which you can find a bunch of various utilities for Cyberpunk 2020 and Cyberpunk Red. I'm on the various Cyberpunk Reddits, Cyberpunk Red and Cyberpunk 2020 Reddits. Also on a plethora of Discord servers, so if you type in at Cybersmily, good chance you're going to hit me. I don't do Twitter or Facebook. I just can't stand those platforms. So that's it from my side. Wisdom?
I'm Wisdom000. You can, of course, find my works at Datafortress2020.com. I am easy to reach, either at wisdom000@gmail.com, or I'm on Facebook, where I also mod. I'm the administrator for the Datafortress 2020 Facebook group. I'm a mod for the Cyberpunk 2020 Facebook group, and I'm a member of many others. I'm on Discord, although I don't pay a lot of attention to it most of the time. So if you send me a message through there, it may be a couple of days before I am able to get it and respond. But I love talking to anyone who has any questions or just wants to talk about Cyberpunk 2020. Yeah, please reach out to us, people. If you've got ideas for future shows, if you've got questions about our podcast or about anything we've covered, or are just looking for advice, reach out to us either individually or as something we'll cover on air, and we will try and make that happen.
That we will. Yeah, so on Cyber Nation's Discord, we do have a channel for this show, so you can also reach us there as well.
Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yep. Ciao.